What if your daughter disappeared? Your mother, your son? What if years have passed and you're no closer to finding them?
When a person goes missing, their story doesn't stop there.
Each week, Missing brings you stories of missing persons and justice, sourced from the case file of the nonprofit Private Investigations for the Missing.
Listeners Say Missing is the most binge-worthy podcast of all time.
Search Missing wherever you listen to podcasts.
Missing, where mysteries have a mission.
Welcome to Quick Trip. How can I help you?
Why don't you ask him?
It's my turn to bring snacks for our class bake sale.
And?
I just told Mama about it 5 minutes ago.
No problem. We've got fresh donuts.
Oh, thank you. Next thing he's gonna tell me it's our turn to bring the drinks to soccer practice. Steven.
It's our turn to bring drinks to soccer practice.
We've got Gatorade, Powerade, water, you name it.
Thank this nice gentleman for saving your life.
Any reason's a good reason for Quick Trip. QT. More than a gas station.
When Jennifer Harris's body was found in the Red River bordering Oklahoma and Texas, her family was devastated.
That's pretty much all I remember, was just really being hysterical and screaming and crying and probably cursing.
And while any death is difficult to deal with, Jennifer's tragic and untimely exit from this world sent shockwaves through the small town of Bonham, Texas.
I was shaking, and I just couldn't believe it, really.
As the Harris family would soon learn, the aftermath of Jennifer's death would be nearly as traumatic as her murder.
I think the hope was that Jennifer would sink out of sight and not be found for years, but that didn't happen. And so here we are.
Join me as we try to discover what happened to Jennifer Harris and who is responsible for her death. From Cold Case Productions, this is Final Days on Earth, Season 2, The Life and Death of Jennifer Harris, Episode 7, Aftermath. I'm your host, Claire Sanamaw. Thanks for listening. As the word got out that Jennifer Harris's body had been found on May 18, 2002, family and friends flocked to Bonham.
I got back from the Red River where her body was discovered. And, of course, family and friends were coming over to Mimi's. And I believe Dad asked Mimi if she could help create a timeline of Sunday's events that Sunday that she was missing. I just sat and remembered everything and just wrote it all out.
We've covered some of what Jennifer's sister Alyssa wrote in these notes from Grandma Mimi's house in previous episodes. And as we mentioned before, she gave these handwritten notes to Fannin County investigators in 2002, and they became part of Jennifer's official case file. There's a notation on the last page that says, received May 22nd, 2002, 4 p.m. That's 4 days after Jennifer's body was discovered. Back at Grandma Mimi's house on May 18th, Alyssa remembers Jennifer's ex-husband, Rob Holman, in attendance again as the family tried to piece together a timeline.
He was just standing like about 8 feet away from me, or 10 or something, and he was just swaying and pacing and acting nervous, and then kind of trying to like eavesdrop.
Okay.
And then I just kind of gave him a look like, can you give me some space? And then he just quickly turned around.
Alyssa said the fact that Rob had been hanging around the Harris family at all struck her as odd.
I hadn't seen him in over a year, so I thought it was just kind of strange.
Jennifer and Rob had divorced in 2000, and he was in a new relationship with Sarah Beth Ruffner, who he was living with in Bonham. Only a few people knew that Jennifer and Rob had continued to see each other in secret after their divorce. At Grandma Mimi's, Alyssa says she pressed Rob for more details.
I asked if he and Jen met out at Lake Bonham ever to talk in private. because I knew that she had told me they did. I wanted to see what he said. And he said yes, but he kind of downplayed the question by saying, she'd drive around a lot and see him by coincidence. So they'd stop and talk.
Jennifer's abandoned Jeep was found on County Road 2610, behind Lake Bonham. Rob has repeatedly denied that he met Jennifer there on the day she disappeared. And remember, it was Jennifer's ex-boyfriend James Hamilton, not Rob, who showed up by the lake when law enforcement was still processing the scene. For his part, James has said he was not in Fannin County on the day Jennifer disappeared, and his alibi was confirmed by multiple people. Who Jennifer met out at Lake Bonham on May 12, 2002 is still one of the biggest unanswered questions in her case. But authorities agree it was most likely someone that she knew and trusted. As the Harris family went back through their memories from Mother's Day weekend, Alyssa says Rob hovered nearby.
He just kept asking me what he thought happened and who he thought did it. Rob did.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, look, we just found her body.
Yeah.
And why are you asking me who did it? That was just very in my face, to go ask someone who's grieving,
Yeah.
Well, who do you think did it? And the other thing is the concern of Rob's with the state of her body. I remember he asked my dad if there were any findings on Jen's body. That just seemed to be his main concern, and I thought that was, once again, very insensitive and confusing. I thought that was an odd question to ask someone who was grieving, who had just lost their daughter.
Yeah.
He asked my dad if there were any findings on her body. And you don't ask that of someone. If you're truly not interested, you might want to know that, but you've got to have gumption, if that's what you call it, to ask a grieving parent that question about their dead child.
Right. While Rob was giving Alyssa and her father the third degree about findings on Jennifer's body, investigators wanted to turn the tables on him. As one of the main persons of interest, the next logical step was to administer a polygraph to Rob, to set the record straight on his alibi for Sunday, May 12th. Former Fannin County investigator Daryl Parker.
They knew that Rob Homan and Jennifer Harris had been continuing a relationship. They were still communicating and talking to each other. They had talked to each other that morning, in fact. So they definitely would have wanted to talk to him, and they asked him to take a polygraph.
And what happened with Rob's polygraph?
Well, I believe at first he agreed to take the polygraph, but then he refused. He lawyered up and refused to cooperate.
Yeah, it was interesting. He not only initially agreed to do it, he actually made an appointment, filled out a consent form, signed it, had agreed, that he would do this.
Yeah, and it's a thing that we bounce back and forth with all the time, and it's a perception issue, and it's hard to wrestle with because that's that person's right. They don't have to take a polygraph.
Just like invoking your right not to speak to authorities or testify in your own defense, choosing not to take a polygraph exam is not an indication of guilt or innocence. It's every person's right to make their own decision about how and when to cooperate after authorities make these kinds of requests. Rob's own statements show that when law enforcement first asked him about taking a polygraph, he had no hesitation. This is from Rob's initial interview at the Fannin County Sheriff's Office on May 15, 2002. An investigator tells Rob, "We can offer you a polygraph." And Rob says he'd take one.
We can offer you a polygraph if you'll take a polygraph. That's a polygraph. That's good.
It's possible Rob might have had some additional guidance in this area. As so often happens in small-town USA, it turns out that reportedly Rob's uncle by marriage was none other than the lead investigator on Jennifer's case. That's right, several sources have told me that Detective Kelly Warren had married into the Holman family. He's the one you just heard asking Rob if he'd take a polygraph. Here again is Daryl Parker.
I've seen the interview videos, and I don't think that Kelly Warren did anything during the interviews that indicated he was giving Rob any type of favoritism or, nepotism was at play or anything like that. But it does bring up the issue of, was he the right person that should have been doing that? The video looks like he's being, objective, but at the same time, he also knew he was being videotaped. And we don't know what kind of conversations he and Rob had before the interview or after the interview.
We will likely never know exactly what went on between Detective Warren and Rob Holman. Kelly Warren died in 2018, and Rob Holman has declined my request to be interviewed for this podcast, much like he declined the polygraph examination.
So he exercised his right to not take a polygraph. But, at the same time, people who are looking at this and understanding the relationship between the two of them ask the question, why would he not?
Sure. And, there was an interesting qualification from his defense attorney at the time in 2002 who said, if James takes a polygraph, Rob will take one. The Fannin County Offense Report puts it this way. On May 20th, 2002, attorney Ed Smith called Lieutenant McClellan and advised him that he had advised Robert not to take a polygraph exam and not to talk to any investigator without him being present. Then Ed Smith talked with the sheriff and told him that they would like Robert to take a polygraph because they were setting up times for all possible suspects. Ed advised if we get James Hamilton to take a polygraph, he would bring Robert in for one.
Right. And I'm not sure what that was. I think maybe he was hoping that James would refuse and that would get him off the hook.
Daryl also cleared up a common misconception about a polygraph's possible role in the court system.
They actually are admissible in court if both sides agree to it, but both sides never agree to it. So functionally, they're not admissible in court.
I always learn something new in our conversations. I thought that polygraphs just straight up were not admissible in court because that's the way it's always been presented. But actually, you say if both sides agree to it, it could be entered into evidence in a criminal case in Texas.
Yeah, and now I'm not an attorney, but in my experience, I believe that if the prosecution says yes, because for whatever reason they agree that it's a good idea, and the defense says yes, then my understanding is that it is admissible. The judge will allow it, and it's up to the judge. The judge may allow it, and the judge may not allow it.
While Rob ultimately wasn't willing to take a polygraph, James Hamilton, on the other hand, did agree to one. These are the questions that James was asked on May 23, 2002, 5 days after Jennifer's body had been found.
Were you in Fannin County on May 11th, 2002? Were you in Fannin County on May 12th, 2002? Did you cause the death of Jennifer?
James answered no to each of the 4 questions, and he passed the polygraph with no deception indicated.
If I'm a law enforcement officer and I give someone a polygraph and they fail it badly, I may think, okay, I need to pursue this suspect more. But for the most part, polygraphs are used to exclude people. If someone takes a polygraph and they pass it with flying colors, that's a pretty good sign that they're telling the truth, that, they're not nervous at all. They answered all the questions relatively honestly.
It was a solid result, but not necessarily a completely thorough exam, at least in Daryl Parker's opinion.
There's only 4 questions. I would have preferred to see a few more, such as, do you know how Jennifer was killed? Do you know of anyone else who may have been involved in the death of Jennifer Harris? Yes or no questions, but I would like to have seen a little bit more, just so that we know, hey, there are no areas in which he's shaky, right? These are 4 very broad questions.
Claire Sandomal here, host of Final Days on Earth. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsor, Bonafide. Bonafide provides natural solutions for perfectly natural symptoms. They create non-prescription solutions that treat women's health issues from PMS to menopause and everything in between. New products like Sylvessa, the first comprehensive system designed to restore and protect hair and skin affected by estrogen decline from the inside out. Relelzin provides powerful hormone-free relief from menopausal hot flashes and night sweats, so you can stay cool and dry all day and night. Give Bonafide a try today. No hormones and no prescription required. Real relief without compromise. I'm going to give listeners today a special offer when you subscribe to any product by going to hellobonafide.com/FDOE and use promo code FDOE. That's hello, BONAFIDE.com/FDOE and code FDOE to claim your special offer. For the best prices and free shipping, go directly to the hellobonafide.com/FDOE website, so check it out. In this podcast series, we dive deep into many unforeseen scenarios. So as you know, the unexpected does happen. If a medical emergency arises, an Air Medcare Network membership protects your family and your finances. Air Medcare Network crews provide air medical transport to the nearest and most appropriate trauma center. As a member, you'll never see a bill for that flight. That's right, members never pay a dime for transport when flown by an AMCN provider. Health insurance may not cover the full cost of emergency medical air transport, so this is an important membership to have. It covers everyone in your household for just pennies a day. And right now, my listeners get up to a $50 Amazon or Visa e-gift card when you join. Be prepared with an Air Medcare Network membership. Visit airmedcarenetwork.com/final and use offer code FINAL.
This is Allison Brett from The Prosecutors, and we are excited to announce our new show, The Prosecutors Legal Briefs. Each week, we'll bring our experience as prosecutors to true crime in the news. Whether it's breaking developments in a case, the intricacies of sentencing, or analysis of what's really going on in cases like the Amber Heard and Johnny Depp defamation trial, we'll have you covered.
So if you're looking for the latest in true crime from a different point of view, The Prosecutors Legal Briefs is the show for you. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
As the investigation continued, so did the grieving process for Jennifer's family. Part of that grieving process was to have Jennifer's funeral.
I remember planning the funeral. I think I was in a very pretty serious state of shock and post-traumatic stress for some time after.
Because Jennifer's death was an active murder investigation, authorities kept a watchful eye at her memorial service. According to notes in the Fannin County Offense Report on Jennifer's case, Lieutenant Mike McClellan attended the funeral on May 24, 2002. He wrote that James was overwhelmed with sorrow and loss, and that Robert appeared to be unable to walk without help and was very disturbed. Alyssa also shared her memories of James and Rob at the funeral. Alyssa described James as a mess.
He visited beforehand, before she was buried, and just broke down and cried on top of her casket and just spoke so freely to her about how he wished he could have protected her from whatever it was, or whoever did this, and that he loved her and he would do anything for her to be here and happy. And it was sad, because on the one hand I saw someone who I felt was sad anyway, and I felt was a very just miserable person that wanted to be happy and tried to find it, but had just been mistreated.
Yeah, you described him, I think, as a lost child in another interview.
Yeah. He's just, it's a very sad situation, and so I felt bad for him. I did feel empathy for him.
Rob's behavior caught Alyssa's attention for a different reason.
And I thought it was odd that Rob didn't go to any kind of pre-service to see her casket or have any final last words or anything like that, or put a flower on or anything. I don't know. He just completely stayed away.
At the graveside service, both Rob and James were in attendance. Lieutenant McClellan noted in his report that, quote, James was still the same as he was at the funeral home. After the services, James met with several people, including the family, where they shared condolences. Former investigator Daryl Parker.
Law enforcement was there, and they were taking notes on how people were interacting at the funeral. And their notes on James Hamilton describe him as interacting with the family, portraying a typical or normal demeanor for a funeral, that sort of thing.
According to the report, Rob, meanwhile, acted differently than before. Lieutenant McClellan wrote that Rob was, quote, watching and listening, showing no emotions during the graveside service. And afterward, he stayed in the same group of friends, laughing and going on, and at no time did Robert approach the family.
This was a family he had known for years and years. He was not associated with the family. He was standing apart. There were a couple of friends that he was kind of hanging out with, and they were actually laughing and joking about some things. And they noted that it was just odd behavior for a funeral, and specifically his not interacting with the family.
Rob's behavior left an impression on Alyssa.
I felt it very odd that he had no emotion. Rob had no emotion. He, in fact, at one point was smirking and laughing.
Mark Johnson, who would eventually be elected Fannin County Sheriff, had this to say about Rob's behavior at Jennifer's funeral.
They said that he was laughing and chuckling and carrying on at the funeral. Someone who really loved that family cared. That he would find anything to be funny about. So it to me, it's not, things don't add up.
Grief affects people in different ways, right? And how you might react in a traumatic situation would be different than how I would react, or how any third person might react. Here again is Daryl Parker.
That's an element that's been discussed and has been talked about in many, many cases. And it's true. The stages of grief are different for each person. They all process it a different way. There are a lot of people that will laugh uncontrollably and be hysterical, and just a range of emotions in a way that they can express themselves. And so just based on what was seen at the funeral, you just add that as a little note. It doesn't really mean anything by itself.
Though Rob's grieving process may have appeared unorthodox to some, James's was more in line with what investigators expected. It was very interesting just because James was the one who had been seen as the outsider, the newer boyfriend, the not country type, he he was sort of the rebound after Rob. And a lot of times you rebound in a completely different direction. Whenever you have a new relationship after a long-standing one falls apart. And so, even by James's own description, Jennifer's family never really accepted him, never really felt close to him. But here we are at the funeral, and he's being described by law enforcement, a neutral third party, as seeing more, close to the family, more interactive with the family than Rob, who had known them, as you said, since he was a kid and had been an actual part of their family when he was married to Jennifer. If anyone was going to feel comfortable around them, you would think it would be Rob at this point.
Yeah, and there are other notes throughout the file that, James Hamilton came up and tried to help look for Jennifer, and he was concerned, and he volunteered to take the polygraph and all these kind of things. He was searching for her, whereas the descriptions of Rob's behavior at the family home, the grandmother's house, he was really asking a lot of questions about the crime scene, about the state of the body, about, things you may say that that's a natural curiosity, but he was not engaging with the search for Jennifer the way James Hamilton was. He was really fishing for information.
Yeah, that was very interesting to me as well. And, something that stood out as I was going back through the file, they made notes that James would periodically call police. He would call the Fannin County Sheriff's Department. He would call the Bonham Police Department and ask if there were any updates on Jennifer's case. Like, he wanted to know, what are you doing? Are you finding out who did this to Jennifer?
Yeah. And that's, that's a kind of a two-edged sort of thing. A lot of times, the perpetrators will return to the scene of the crime, right? So there's that aspect of it. Was he returning to the scene of the crime, and was he wanting to get information from police? That's possible. But at the same time, his willingness to cooperate. I mean, he interviewed with police. He did the polygraph. He interviewed with the Texas Rangers. He was, going up to an environment, like you said, in the family where he was really the outsider.
Remember, Rob had also cooperated with police while Jennifer was a missing person. He came in for questioning and even did a ride-along interview with authorities on the back roads of Bonham. And he previously had been very involved with Jennifer's family, joining them at Grandma Mimi's house for numerous conversations about the case. But then, something changed.
And then I do know that once we did find out more, he refused to talk to us at all.
Really?
He lawyered up, and if we needed to talk to him, we would speak to him through his attorney.
And do you remember when that happened? Whenever, one day he's at the family gatherings, he's offering you beer out of the back of his truck.
Mm-hmm.
He's at Mimi's house, and then suddenly he only speaks to you through a lawyer.
Right. It was after she was found.
Prior to Jennifer's body being found, Rob had joined Jennifer's dad, Jerry, on his searches. But as memories flooded back to Jerry, he recalled an encounter that made its way into the Fannin County Sheriff's Office report. Jerry stated that 2 days after Jennifer went missing, on May 14th, Rob joined him on his drive to search for Jennifer. They reached the Timber Creek Bridge near County Road 2610, where Jennifer's Jeep was found. There, Jerry asked Rob if he thought there would be enough water in the creek to carry a body. In the report, it says Jerry noticed that Rob's eyes visually changed from a cornflower blue to a pale gray and then white. Jerry and Rob then got out of the truck and looked up and down the ditch line. When they got to a road, Rob stated, quote, "I guess this is a dead end." Jerry stated that Rob was detached and silent for the rest of the day. 4 days later, on the evening of May 18th, the same day that Jennifer's body was found in the Red River, Rob was still spending time with the Harris family. He once again joined them at Grandma Mimi's house. And at that time, Rob was back to feeling quite chatty. Several attendees, including Alyssa, took note of what Rob said shortly after learning that Jennifer's body had been discovered. Here again is Daryl Parker.
He was asking questions about the condition of the body. He asked, was she naked? My opinion, but when someone who wasn't there just out of the blue says, was she naked? And in fact, her body was completely stripped of all clothing, that's pretty suspicious.
I could see that for sure. And I've seen that statement, was she naked, has stood out in multiple reports, in other documentations that exist in this case. And in fact, multiple people who heard Rob say that made a point of mentioning it to law enforcement in their interviews. So it's documented multiple times.
Yeah, it's such an odd yet specific statement that it bears looking at. And there's another statement too. He said, I never should have left her. And that doesn't make sense, because what is he talking about? In their marriage, Jennifer left him. So she left him and she was trying to reconcile. So if he says, I never should have left her, what did he mean?
Yeah, that's a good point, because if you look at Rob's other statements about his actions on May 12th, 2002, he previously told law enforcement that he didn't meet with Jennifer on May 12th. So the idea of saying, I never should have left her, I thought you didn't see her on May 12th. I thought you weren't there. I thought you never met her that day.
It doesn't make sense unless he wasn't being honest.
Even back in 2002, investigators questioned Rob's truthfulness with them. On a timeline from the Fannin County Sheriff's Office, Lieutenant Mike McClellan characterized Rob's interview as having deceptive statements on May 15th. And in law enforcement's interview with Rob's girlfriend Sarah Beth after Jennifer's body was found, they used even stronger language. This is Rob's uncle, Detective Kelly Warren.
Of course, you know where we're going with all this questioning.
Yeah, it upsets me terribly.
Rob hasn't been honest with us. Rob hasn't been honest with a lot of people. Okay? And that alone, that in itself, puts him in a precarious situation. Okay? So, we need to put the pieces together. And it's a 360-degree circle. Everybody's involved. Nobody's left untouched. Nobody's untouchable.
On the next episode of Final Days on Earth, the life and death of Jennifer Harris. Authorities hone in on statements from eyewitnesses in the investigation.
Mr. McClellan has talked to a witness that places you and her together on Sunday. I left the letter on the side of the road. I left the letter somewhere.
Could what they saw take the case to the next level?
The person who called Jennifer Harris's Jeep in the next morning, right? There's an abandoned Jeep out here. Well, turns out that she had seen the Jeep the night before, after Jennifer was gone. So she's an important witness.